Jerry Paulley, the beloved host of Hillbilly Horror Stories podcast, brought joy, chills, and laughter to countless listeners with his warm spirit and captivating storytelling. Through his passion for the paranormal and his deep love for the community he built, Jerry turned every episode into a space where friends and strangers alike could come together and share in the mysteries of the unknown. His legacy will live on through the stories he told and the lives he touched. He reminded us that even in the darkest tales, there's always room for light. Rest in peace, Jerry. You'll be deeply missed, but never forgotten.
I was lucky enough to meet Jerry at the Mako live show about a year ago. We sat down and had a great conversation. He was a really nice guy who was really interested in learning about me, sharing what he knew. His joy, his light shone through in every conversation I had with him. And I was lucky to have several. He was a great guy, and he'll be deeply missed. Our love goes out to Tracy and her family. I know this is a really hard time. Jerry's going to be missed.
We at the Unfreaking Believable podcast celebrate Jerry's life, thank him for his mentorship and for the community he created online. We also feel incredibly privileged to have had the opportunity to interview him just a couple of days before he fell ill. We give our love to his family and to all his fans out there. Rest in peace, Jerry Paulley.
Hey, this is Jerry Paulley from the Hillbilly Horror Stories Paranormal Podcast, and you are listening to the Unfreaking Believable Podcast.
Welcome to another exciting episode of Unfreaking Believable. We invite you to pull up a chair, relax, and join in for the next 30 minutes or so as we bring you guests who will share with you the moments that made a difference in their lives. And it's all because of that one inciting incident. We believe that life is infinitely stranger than fiction, stranger than anything the mind can invent. You might even say, it's unfreaking believable.
Welcome to the podcast. We're your hosts. I'm Jen.
I'm Jenny.
I'm Betsy. How's everybody doing tonight?
Well, excited for another episode.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We've been cranking them out here lately.
Yeah.
Seems like we're on the mic every night.
And we will be again
Almost.
tomorrow, too.
That's right. That's
Awesome.
right. You know what I can't believe is that actually, as of tomorrow, we'll be recording our last episode of season 1.
Yeah.
That's unfreaking believable.
That is unfreaking believable. I mean, if you think about that, we have had 26 episodes
Yeah.
as of tomorrow.
Wow. Where did the time go?
Right?
I know. And I'd like to just say we've never missed a drop date.
That's true. We have not. And we had some bonus episodes.
Yep.
That's true.
Ooh, and don't forget our Patreon stuff. We put out some fun stuff for our Patreon listeners, too.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed. Still working on a big surprise, which might be to celebrate the advent of season 2.
Yeah.
Or the end of season 2, however long it takes, right?
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Yep.
Don't judge
All right,
me.
Jen, give us your word of the day.
Well, given that our guest for today is a fan of all things spooky and, in fact, the host of the Hillbilly Horror Stories and the Wickedly Weird podcasts, I chose a word that I think has just the right feel for that sort of a guest. So our word is putridarium.
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 Interesting.
Which is a temporary burial place while a body decomposes. Typically, monks or nuns are laid in a putridarium, and once the appropriate level of decomposition takes place, the bones are cleaned and stored in an ossuary, which if you've ever seen those sort of chapels that are completely decorated with bones, that's an ossuary.
Yeah.
Yes, I seem to remember that scene in book 4, The Monk's Grimoire. Just a little plug there.
Yeah.
We do a lot of work in one of the ossuaries there. So very interesting. Okay,
Yeah.
Jenny, fun facts.
Fun facts, 3 quick ones for you today. Fact 1, a Boeing 747 uses 1 gallon of gas every second. I had no idea.
I didn't either.
I was like, that's
That's a lot of
interesting.
gas.
That's a lot of gas. All right, number 2. the Pope can't be an organ donor. I had no idea about that he
Why
couldn't.
not?
I think it's a religious thing, I guess, but it didn't make sense to me. I'm like, wait a minute. I'm like, I know a lot of Catholic people that are organ donors, but the Pope can't. And I was keeping them short today, so I don't have all the long text on it.
Okay, that's interesting. I'm going to go look that one up.
Yeah.
I would say maybe one of our fans could drop us an email or post in our Facebook group and explain to us why that might be the case.
Yeah,
'Cause
I'd be
I would like
interested to know that.
Yep.
Yeah.
I will hold off on Googling it in case one of our fans wants to
Right
tell us.
on. Because normally I'll do
Fair enough.
I'll do 2 long ones and then 3 quick ones. I'm waiting for somebody to catch on that I'm Morse coding these, but it's okay. Or Morse coding, I should say. I said Morse, like the cat. All right,
Yeah.
here we go. Last one, and I found this one to be wicked cool. The world's very first vending machine was a holy water dispenser.
Now, how did that work?
Again, because it's the quick ones, I don't have all the long
Yeah.
text
Oh
on
my
them,
gosh.
so I'm like, ugh.
I'm just telling you, there's something deeply wrong with me that I'm picturing, somebody putting a floor in or
Ozarka
a
water machine.
shilling into a machine, and it just squirts right in their
Yeah.
face.
Yeah.
Because I obviously watched too much Three Stooges as a child.
Probably
is
so.
obviously what's happened there.
That's awesome. Great fun facts. All right, are we ready to get this episode going?
Yes, we
Let's rock it.
are.
All right. So for this episode, our guest is a fellow podcaster who I had the great honor to meet in person about a year ago in Indiana for the Mako live show. Jerry Paulley is a podcaster and author. He and his lovely wife, Tracy, have traveled all over the country doing live events and checking out haunted places. He grew up in a haunted house, but more surprisingly, he spent about 15 years as a stand-up comedian. I'm going to want to know more about that. And I've had Jerry on my list to be on our show since we started, so it's finally happening. Jerry, we're so excited to have you on the podcast. Welcome to the show.
Well, I'm excited to be on. I appreciate the offer to come on.
Fantastic. So why don't you tell us a little bit more about you and how you got started?
Well, I was born at a very early age. So, no,
Here comes that stand-up. I'm excited
There
for
we
it.
go. I knew it was coming.
just mainly, like I said, I grew up in a haunted house. I say grew up, but it was technically about 5 years from about the time I was 13 to about 18. So that kind of kicked off my fascination with the paranormal. Felt like I had a pretty good life, got married at a young age, had some kids, was married for about 13 years, and then got divorced. That led to some deep states of depression, a failed suicide attempt back in 2001. And I say all that just to basically say all my stand-up comedy career was after that point. All the podcasting, the book that I wrote, all of it came after that. So it's just to let people know, no matter how bad you think life is, there's so much more in front of you. I mean, had that suicide attempt been completed, everything since then, from meeting my wife to my grandkids, none of that would have happened.
Yeah.
And we've been able to help so many people on our show that have had some mental health issues or depression or what have you. We've made that part of our podcast is to reach out. And we have a Facebook group of about 7,000 people that we've completely turned into a self-help group. I say self-help, not self-help, but a mental health help group. So people can come in there. It's a safe place. We've got 9 moderators just to make sure there's no trouble started in there. And we haven't had a problem in a year and a half, not one complaint. So
that's fantastic. And I know the middle-aged and creeped out guys really were inspired by your focus on the mental health, and that's kind of what they focus on. And one of the things that we tossed out when we were starting to talk about putting together our podcast was, we wanted to support that kind of community. So kudos to you. I think that's really fantastic.
It didn't start off that way. I think, I can't remember what episode, but we did cover the suicide forest over in Japan. And I just told that story in the beginning and it got such a good response. I thought, well, we've got a platform. Why not use it? So I think that was episode maybe 21, 22. So we were, 4 or 5 months into it before we started doing that. But now we're 8.5 years in. So it's been as big a part of the show as anything.
Well, when we had the Mako guys on in the past, one of the things that we talked about then, and I think you're sort of highlighting that point here too is how important it is for men to be able to feel like they can discuss mental health, because I think even though it's getting a little bit better, I think in our society, men a lot of times tend to suffer in silence. So I think creating a platform for that is so important.
Yeah, there's definitely a stigma about being a big tough guy. And, and I'm not one of these people that fall into that, toxic masculinity type thing where I think masculinity is a bad thing. But I do think that people have to know you can be a strong man and also need to talk things and get it off your chest. So there's nothing wrong with that whatsoever.
Nothing at all. I think there's a lot of stigmatism too with cultural backgrounds that I noticed, because I myself have battled with mental health issues. I'm a retired firefighter, went through depression, PTSD, same thing, with I didn't, have a failed attempt, but I planned out my end. And culturally, I learned from going to all these groups that, oh, in your Irish culture, you're not allowed to have mental health issues. But then I also found out from other people, they're like, nope, we're Spanish. You're not allowed to have mental health issues. So I think it's a cultural thing as well.
Yeah, I'm sure it is.
Yeah.
Well, I think people have a tendency to want to shy away from things that that maybe they don't understand very well, especially emotional things. And they also, I think that people who are suffering are very cognizant of that, and they don't want to make other people uncomfortable. So they have a tendency to mask how they're feeling and just, not want to bother other people. And I say bother in quotation marks.
No, you're 100% correct. And I think we are our worst enemies when it comes to how we look at ourselves, and we will always have that self-deprecating opinion of ourselves. So when things start going a little bad and you start having a bout of depression, you automatically go to, well, nobody cares about my problems. There's nobody there. I mean, how many times have you heard somebody say or write on Facebook or something, nobody cares about me at all? And you could probably name 30 people right off your bat that thinks about them, but you isolate yourself in that situation to where you just, you convince yourself that you're nobody.
It's definitely something that, we beat ourselves up about, that self-isolation, and it can be crippling.
Absolutely. So, Jerry, let's talk a little bit about the podcast. Tell us a little bit about your podcast.
Well, it's primarily a paranormal podcast. We do sneak in a little bit of, we've done a story before on a cult on the Ant Hills gang, which really had nothing to do with paranormal, but it was creepy. So we threw it in there. We've done a couple of true crime episodes, like the, I forgot what the group of them was, but the Chicago Ripper crew. I mean, and we did that because there was some satanic messaging in there that was part of the reason for it. So we'll cover some stuff like that, or Dashloff Pass that might be just, we have no clue what really happened there. But for the most part, it's paranormal. We try to have some good special guests on. They don't have to be paranormal related as far as the guests. Sometimes it's just because we think this might motivate somebody, and we're all about motivation. So we've had Tommy Chong on the show. And we didn't even talk. He was on for an hour and 10 minutes, and we never even brought up paranormal.
Nice. Wow.
We've had Art Alexakis, the lead singer for Everclear. He's been on the show, and, he's got a remarkable story. He's been clean and sober for like 35 years, but he watched his brother get shot and killed during a drug deal. He was a drug dealer himself.
Oh my gosh.
But he had it's just a crazy comeback story, for somebody who had seen so much. And, then we've had all the big name paranormal investigators on the show. If you've seen them on TV, they've probably been on our show.
Have you had Josh Gates on your show?
We haven't had Josh. Josh is a little out of our league, I think.
He's on my bucket list.
Yeah. I would kill to have Josh on our show.
Yeah.
And I mean
for
that.
sure.
So if you know who I could kill to get him on the show.
I'm working on that. I've got an angle I think I can get in. I'm trying on that one. He's on my list, my big ask list. So yeah, absolutely.
Here's a funny thing, Jerry. You brought up Everclear. For some reason, for about the last week, Everclear keeps popping up in my consciousness, in my sphere of things. And I'm not sure why, but there's a funny connection. My husband was a musician in high school and was friends with the drummer, Greg, of Everclear. And so that somehow came up in conversation. And ever since then, I've had Everclear showing up in various places. So I feel like that must mean something because I don't believe in accidents or coincidences. So it's definitely some synergy there and you're reinforcing it. If you figure out what it's for, let me know.
It is pretty cool. And for me, that was a dream come true because I have been an Everclear fan for as long as I can remember. And, I've taken my kids to see Everclear. They were big Everclear fans. And oddly enough, they actually came and did a free concert at the Kentucky State Fair on my birthday this past year. So it's just like
Right on.
all these things. So to be able to get Art on the show, I mean, it was absolutely incredible. And he is such a cool guy. So I got tickets for a meet and greet. And I had sent some messages to his handlers about getting him on the show. And I got a couple of responses back and it was like, we'll see what we could do, blah, blah, blah. But that's kind of where it lay. This went on for 3 weeks and we got to go talk for a little bit. And we had a one-on-one conversation just at this concert at the meet and greet for probably 10 minutes of just nothing about anything. But I was like, man, I think your story is really inspiring. And, I had sent some message to your handlers and lo and behold, the very next day, I get a message from his handler and said, "Hey, Art wants to come on the show." So he
That's
actually
awesome.
listened and he could have blown me off he didn't know anything about us, but he told his handlers he remembered and said, "I want to come on the show." So I thought that was very cool to meet one of your idols and then interview him.
Don't you love it when celebrities are decent people?
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Now, you've covered some pretty spooky places in your podcast because I listen to your show. Glob's Castle, the Slovakian Triangle. Is there somewhere you haven't covered yet? And of all the places you've covered, where's the one you'd like to go to the most?
You know, is there a place that we haven't covered is a trick question because I always seem to find a place that I didn't even know existed and pull a cool story. And a lot of those literally they're not the big name places. We've gotten over the past 6, 8, 9 months, we've done a lot of more personal stories where, hey, I just moved into this house and this crazy stuff happened and people outside of them didn't really know the story. So when we do a story like that, we get good response because most people have never heard it before, but as far as a place that for a long time, we didn't cover the Limp Mansion in St. Louis. And that place is just tragic, full of suicides in that family. And for whatever reason, for the longest time, it was the only story that I started writing and then stopped and decided not to do it. I just didn't find it that fascinating at the time I was doing it. And it literally was like 6 years ago. And I said, no, I got halfway through it and said, I'm going to do something else. But for whatever reason, about 2 or 3 months ago, on one of our Patreon bonuses, I actually covered it. So eventually, like when we're out of town, probably Christmas, that'll pop up on the feed for that episode that week. So nobody's heard it except for our Patreon supporters. But we've not been there. I do have a brick from there that sits right behind me that a listener brought to one of our shows in Louisville that they got from the kitchen area there that had been, I guess part of it had been demolished or something and they grabbed it and brought it to us. So
of all the places you've covered, where would you like to go and visit?
Oh, wow. Probably the ancient Ram Inn in England. That would probably be my choice. London Tower, probably second.
Oh, I love the Tower of London.
I want to go there.
It's fantastic. I could do that Beefeater tour just over and over and over again. It's so fascinating every time.
Yeah, I had an ancestor who used to care for the crows or the ravens there.
Oh,
So
yeah.
The Raven
that's in my
Master?
family tree. Yeah, that's in my family tree. So
That's
kinda
awesome.
neat.
Awesome.
I'm looking at the notes, Betsy, that you worked on, and I had first read this wrong, and now I'm blown away. So I hope you don't mind me mentioning this one. Because I read it first as 4, not 40. Is it true your show has had 40 million downloads?
Give or take, it's probably a little more than that now. We get about 250,000 downloads a month, so every 4 months we hit another million.
That's
Sweet.
impressive. That's awesome.
You should
Goals,
just picture
ladies.
us all doing the Wayne's World "We're Not Worthy" thing
Yeah, we're
right
not
now.
worthy. We're not worthy.
It's all about longevity.
Yep.
I was talking to somebody the other day. We have 1,300 episodes, 1,400 episodes up. So theoretically, if you're a new listener, you got 1,400 episodes that if you really wanted to go through over a 3 or 4 month period, that you can do that. So, I mean, you guys, if you get a new listener, there's only so many episodes they can go through. So you're kind of limited as to what kind of numbers you can get now. But you get 6, 7, 8 years in, and you put a bunch of episodes like that together, then, lo and behold, those numbers really start adding up.
Yeah. One of our mentors says you cannot fail if you refuse to quit. And so we have been determined that we refuse to quit. We're going to keep doing this because we want that kind of longevity. That's important to us. So fantastic. I think that's awesome. So I'm sure our listeners would love to hear why we've invited you on the show. You have an unfreaking believable story to tell us, and the floor is yours.
You know what? I had one I was going to tell, but I'm going to switch it up because I like this story. It's kind of my go-to story. All right, so let's go back to 2006. My mother passed away. She was 54 years old. I was at her bedside holding her hand when she took her last breath, me and my 2 sisters. My mom and myself did not have a very good relationship over the last, we'll say 5 or 6 years. Now, at one point in time, we were extremely close. When I was like 13, we'd go to bingo and stuff together back when you could take a 13-year-old to bingo. We would do that kind of stuff together. We'd play cards together. But as I started hitting my teen years and moved out on my own and started being like 21, 22 with a family, we just didn't see eye to eye on a lot of things. And so there were times where I would go over to my dad's house, which my mom lived there too, but she'd be in a back room. And I wouldn't even go back there sometimes. I'd sit there and talk to my dad for 30, 40 minutes and get up and leave and not even go back there. She would call and I would see who it is. And I'm like, oh man. And a lot of times I wouldn't answer the phone, or if I did answer, I'd rush her off the phone. And then when she unexpectedly died, because she didn't have any kind of an illness a major illness, when she unexpectedly died, I had this huge amount of grief that had come over me, as most people probably would. You don't expect to lose a parent at 54 years old. Hell, I'm 56 now. I'm 2 years older than she was. And so I'm doing stand-up comedy. I'm in my first year, we'll say. My mother got to see me perform one time up at the Comedy Caravan in Louisville. It was an open mic night, so it was like 4 minutes. So she really didn't get to see much, but she got to see a little bit. It's the only time she saw me perform. I went out on my own and started doing kind of my own thing in stand-up comedy. And I had set up a show at this little bar. And this is kind of there's a double part to this story that I'll get to at the end here. But we set up a show at this little bar. It is a legitimate hole-in-wall. I bet there was a bar area and then a little step down in another room where they did karaoke. I bet that whole room wasn't 800 square feet. So I'm at the show really early. And as I'm going over some stuff in the main bar area, there's 2 bikers that come in, man and a woman. They're late 40s. And just like you would expect, they're dressed in traditional biker gear, jeans and leather and stuff like that. And they both looked pretty road hard and put away wet, as the saying is back where we're from. They've been through a lot, it looks like. So they come in and we're just BSing around a little bit. And I said, hey, are you coming to the show? Are you coming to see the show? And they're like, we didn't even know there was a show. We, this is our first stop, amongst the 2, 3, 4 bars they were going to hit that night. I said, oh, okay. So they find out I'm a comedian and the guy starts telling me jokes, because that's what always happens when somebody finds out you're a comedian. And we chit chat a little bit. They don't know me. I don't know them. We didn't talk about anything of any substance. So I tell him, I said, well, I'm gonna go in the next room and start going over my act. I had it all written down on like a legal pad. So I go sit down. This place only seated like 25 people. There was like 6 or 7 long tables in there. That was it. I'm sitting on one end and I'm going on my stuff. Well, then they come in and they sit down. We're still like an hour and a half before the show. So nobody else is in there. They come in, they sit down on the opposite end. And sometimes when you're in a situation like that, you kind of feel a little awkward, like I should probably be talking to them and not ignoring them. So I go over and I start talking to them. Again, the chit chat starts up. Well, the gentleman, he says, hey, your mom just wants you to know that everything's okay. This is about 6 months after my mom passed. I'm thinking he's making a joke and I don't get the joke, but I did that little awkward laugh, hey, yeah. And she reaches over, puts her hand right on top of my hand and said, no, your mom really wants you to know that everything's okay. They don't know my mom's passed. We've not discussed any of that. And I can't tell you the wave of emotion that just instantly hit me. I broke down. And I said, yeah, we didn't have the best of relationships when she passed away. And the woman said, we're aware of that. And she just wants you to know that that's all in the past. None of that matters now. Everything is back the way that it should be. It's fixed. So don't spend time worrying about it. And I honestly don't remember a lot of what we talked about. There was about a 15-minute conversation, but I was so overwhelmed that a lot of it just has escaped me over the years. The next day I couldn't have told you everything we talked about. And one of the things they brought up is they said, well, she just thinks that you should be doing better things than like performing at this place. And I'm like, yeah, I would like that too. But, it takes time and you got to put in your dues and you got to get your practice wherever you can get your practice in and whatever the case. And, but yeah, so at that point in time, they get up and leave. And I've never seen them before, never seen them since. I have no idea if they knew what was going on there. I don't know if they got any recollection of it to this day. And I don't know if when they came there, if that was supposed to happen or if that's just something that happened after they got there. I have no clue whatsoever. Now, I said there was a part 2 to the story, and I honestly didn't remember this until about 6 or 7 years after the case. That little hole in the wall bar, myself, my dad, and my mom stopped in at and played some pool one time. You got to realize my mom was not somebody to go to bars. My dad really wasn't somebody to go to bars, but we went somewhere and we just decided to stop in there and shoot pool. It's the only time we ever had been at a bar together, ever. And I was, 35 or something at the time. And then it dawned on me 5 or 6 years later that was the same location where I did the show that we had stopped in and played pool. So I don't know if that was a connection or not, but I got to believe that it probably was.
It's unfreaking believable.
Yeah, I don't believe in coincidences. Wow.
Yeah, there's definitely some synergy happening there.
And that place, unfortunately, is no longer around. They tore it down about 8 or 10 years ago.
That's too bad.
Maybe it served its purpose.
Yeah. So you did a lot of stand-up comedy. What would you say was probably your biggest success in that?
I've been able to open for a lot of pretty well-known comedians. I did some headlining, of course. I've traveled all around the South and the Midwest. Never really made it out West. But the improv, they would have like 13 locations throughout the South and Midwest. I would just go from one to the other to the other. Opened for Rodney Carrington back when Rodney was first starting out. Well, you probably know all about Rodney being from Oklahoma.
Yeah, we do. And, we know Rodney.
When he first got the television show, he invited me out. Of course, he lived in Enid, Oklahoma at one point, and he invited me out to his ranch and to see the filming of the first episode. And then the show got put off for a while, so I never made it to the. They did it, but it was like a year later, so I didn't get a chance to make it to that one. But yeah, every time Rodney would come to Louisville or Lexington, he'd always send me a message and hook me up with tickets, and so I didn't have to worry about that. But yeah, a bunch of the well-known comedians out there of Rodney's stature, too many to even mention, to be honest with
Yeah.
you. But I always kept a good relationship with Rodney, so I still talk to him every once in a while. But that was probably the one I enjoyed the most.
That's fantastic. I know a couple of stand-up comedians, so I was interested to see if there's anybody I knew. So Rodney's one of them. I mean, I don't know him in person, but I know of him.
I'll have to ask my sister if she and her husband ever saw you live because they live in Lexington, so they would have been some of your locals. So I'll have to ask them if they ever went to a comedy show and saw you. That would be pretty cool.
Oh, nice, yeah.
Another little piece of synergy if that's the case.
Yeah, definitely. We've hit a couple of points tonight on that, so that's fantastic.
Betsy talked about your book, and we kind of alluded to it earlier, but I have to admit, I knew you were a podcaster. I did not know you had written a book. Will you tell our listeners a little bit about your book and where to find it?
Well, I'm glad that you phrased it that way, that I have written a book, because I definitely do not consider myself to be an author. An author is somebody who does this for a living, or at least semi part of a living, or something. Or, I wrote one book and it was about my life, and I couldn't see me being able to accomplish that anymore. So I definitely don't consider myself an author. But what happened was people were constantly hitting us up after the show became popular. We're talking 6 years ago. So they were saying, "Hey, why don't you write a book? Why don't you write a book?" And I'm like, a lot of other podcasters out there are writing books, but what they're doing is rehashing stories that, the Bell Witch or the Amityville Horror. And I'm like, I don't have anything I can add to that, not as far as writing a book. So there's no point in writing one. But then we started having a lot of people write us and tell us that the show changed their life, or it forced them to go get help, or they were going to commit suicide and they chose not to. And they were pretty graphic in some of these things. And I thought, that's something that I could do that nobody else has done, is we can talk about my life, not from an egotistical standpoint, but you got to realize that our listeners, uh, our listeners know me in one way, and that's from the podcast. And my past is definitely, I'm not going to say shady, because that's probably a little bad at putting it, but, I had the suicide attempt. I had a divorce. I had times where I was not the best husband by any means, which led to the divorce. And I had, times where I've done some unscrupulous things in my past, and I've worked to not be that person in the past 20 years. And I thought, it's risky, but I should disclose that to the listeners so they can see, if they're in that situation, that they can make changes. So I wasn't sure how it was going to be received by the listeners. So the book is in 3 parts. The book is basically growing up with in the haunted house. So I cover those 5 years. Over all 3 areas, I cover my relationship with my mom, because that's the one recurring facet. But the first part, like I said, is about growing up in the haunted house. The second part is about my divorce, what led to it, battling depression, the suicide attempt, and how I was able to cope with depression without taking medication, because it wasn't something that worked for me. And then the third part is how we started the podcast, and how we then used the podcast to help people that were doing it. So it literally is like 3 mini books inside of one book. And it's the whole book's not that big anyway. It probably took Betsy a day and a half to read it, if that. So
And what's the title?
it's Hillbilly Horror Stories from Hell to High Water.
Okay. All right. And then our listeners could find that on Amazon if they were so
Yeah,
inclined.
It's on Amazon. I think it's $15 on Amazon. And if you go to our website, hillbillyhorrorstories.com, you can actually get an autographed version for $20, and that includes your shipping. So
That's awesome.
Fantastic. Jerry, thanks so much for sharing that. I think that's important, that other people see that they're not alone in that struggle. So having the courage to come out and talk about that's going to help somebody down the road. That's fantastic.
Well, then I also wanted people to see, just because you have an image of somebody right now doesn't mean that's the way it always was.
It's true.
I think it's accurate now, but that does, that doesn't mean that you can't change if you're struggling with something right now. And we have conversations, Tracy and I, we have 4 or 5 people every week writing each of us that are just struggling and they just need somebody to talk to. And that's what we preach on our show. We've given out our personal phone numbers and Facebook and whatever. And so we're constantly talking to somebody that needs to talk. I mean, we sat and video chatted with somebody last night for about 45 minutes, and Tracy video chatted with somebody today for about 2.5 hours, because that's how long it took.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I think people really struggle with so much loneliness now because, we can connect like this, any day of the week, but to find somebody that can really connect is completely different than just being able to FaceTime or talk on the phone. Somebody who truly listens, who really cares, who can say, I can't tell you what to do, but I know what you're going through and here's what worked for me. I think that's fantastic. And kudos to you and Tracy both for that.
Yeah, we appreciate it. I've said this 1,000 times. I don't know how long we'll continue to do the show, but what's kept us going this long is the people that say the show was something that really means something to them. If it wouldn't for that, we probably would have quit 3 or 4 years ago, honestly.
Yeah. Wow. That's great. Jerry, thank you for coming on the show and sharing your story and explaining what makes you unfreaking believable. I'd also like to thank my lovely co-hosts and besties. Listeners, if you enjoyed this episode, please rate and review it on whatever platform you listen on. You can find us on Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music, and Audible.
You can also join our Unfreaking Believable Facebook group and follow us on TikTok, Instagram, and X. You can also join us on Patreon for exclusive content and other perks for as little as $1 a month. What a bargain for you.
You can also visit our website at www.ufbpodcast.com. And if you have an unfreaking believable story, reach out to us at ufbpodcast@gmail.com because we'd like to hear your story too.
All right, Betsy, I've been waiting for this one. You want to send us out with your quote of the day?
I do. My quote of the day today comes from Mitch Albom. Let me see if I say that right. Mitch Albom. And he says, I don't know about heaven or hell, but I do know that we are visited all the time by spirits of those who affected us in life.
I wholeheartedly agree with that statement.
Yeah. Perfect for this episode.
I
picked it out yesterday before I even knew the story. So another synchronicity in the universe tonight.
There we go. Thanks, everyone, for joining us on the Unfreaking Believable podcast. And remember, as you go out into the world this week, don't just be awesome.
Be unfreaking believable.
See you all next time.